The pin was 3 inches long, brass, sharp enough to pierce leather. Isobel Gowdie watched it glint in the candlelight as the examiner held it up for the crowd to see. She was naked, standing in the center of a cold stone room in Scotland. 15 men surrounded her, watching, waiting. She'd been standing like this for an hour while they searched her body, every inch, looking for something, a mark, a sign, proof, and they'd found it, behind her left shoulder, a small patch of skin, slightly raised, different texture than the rest. The examiner approached her with the pin. "This will determine your fate," he said. His voice was flat, professional, like a doctor about to perform surgery. Isobel closed her eyes. She was 67 years old. She'd lived through war, famine, the death of 2 husbands and 3 children. She could handle a pinprick. The examiner pressed the point against the mark on her shoulder. Pushed, hard. Nothing. Isobel felt nothing. She opened her eyes, confused. Why didn't it hurt? She'd felt him press against her skin, but there was no sharp pain, no sting, no sensation at all. The examiner withdrew the pin. He showed it to the magistrate. No blood on the tip. "The devil's mark," he declared. She felt no pain. The skin did not bleed. "This is proof of her compact with Satan." The crowd murmured. Some gasped. Others nodded knowingly. Isobel's legs went weak. She tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in her throat. 3 weeks later, they burned her alive in the town square. What Isobel didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the pin was a trick, spring-loaded, designed to retract into the handle when pressed against flesh. It looked like it was piercing her skin, but it never touched her at all. The examiner knew. He'd used the same pin on dozens of women. It worked every time. Because the test wasn't designed to find truth. It was designed to guarantee guilt. I'm your host at Ash and Crown History, where we don't just tell you what happened in the past. We tell you the stories that reveal why it matters today. And today's story is about the devil's mark, the scientific test that killed thousands of people, the con men who profited from it, and the terrible truth about what happens when authority manufactures evidence instead of finding it. If you want to hear stories that connect the past to the present, stories that show you how the same patterns repeat across centuries, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because Isobel's story is just the beginning, and what you're about to discover will change how you see accusations, evidence, and the terrifying ease with which proof can be created out of nothing. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. To a bitter German monk named Heinrich Kramer, and the book he wrote that would justify the murder of tens of thousands of people. Part 1. The book that started it all. Cologne, Germany, 1485. Heinrich Kramer sat in his monastery cell, furious. 2 weeks earlier, he'd been kicked out of Innsbruck. The local bishop, George Golser, had called him senile and crazy, and ordered him to leave the diocese immediately. Kramer's crime? He'd been interrogating women accused of witchcraft, and his questions had been inappropriate, obsessive. He'd spent hours asking accused women detailed questions about their sex lives, their dreams about demons, their bodies. Bishop Golser had recognized what Kramer was, a predator using religious authority to harass women. But Kramer didn't see it that way. He was convinced he was right. Convinced that witches were real, that women were inherently susceptible to demonic influence, and that he, Heinrich Kramer, was one of the few brave enough to fight them. So he sat down and wrote a book. Not just any book. A comprehensive guide to finding, interrogating, and executing witches. A manual that would prove he was right and Bishop Golser was wrong. He called it the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. In it, he laid out a simple test for identifying witches. Look for the devil's mark. According to Kramer, when a person made a pact with Satan, the devil would physically mark them. Like a brand. Like a signature. This mark would have special properties. It would be insensitive to pain. It wouldn't bleed when pierced. It would prove scientifically and absolutely that the person was a witch. Kramer's book spread across Europe. Within a year, it had been reprinted in multiple cities. Within a decade, it had become the standard reference for witch hunters across the continent. And the Devil's Mark examination became the gold standard for proving witchcraft. But here's what Kramer never admitted in his book. The test was impossible to pass. Because everyone has unusual marks on their body. Everyone. Think about yourself right now. How many moles do you have? Birthmarks? Scars? Freckles? Age spots? Skin tags? The human body is covered in unusual marks. So when witch hunters looked for the devil's mark, they were guaranteed to find something. But finding an unusual mark wasn't enough. They needed to prove it was the devil's mark specifically, that it had those special properties Kramer described. So they developed a test, the pricking test. And that's when a con artist named John Kincaid enters our story. Part 2. The professional pricker. Edinburgh, Scotland, 1649. John Kincaid had a problem. He needed money. He was 32 years old, reasonably educated, but he'd failed at every profession he'd tried. Merchant, clerk, schoolteacher. Nothing stuck. Then he heard about a job opening in Berwickshire. They needed a pricker, someone trained to examine accused witches for devil's marks. The pay was good. £6 per witch found. That was more than most men earned in a month. Kincaid applied. He got the job. His first day, they brought him a woman named Margaret. She was 60, widowed, living alone. Her neighbors had accused her of cursing their cattle. Kincaid was given his tools, a long brass pin, a wooden handle, instructions on how to perform the examination. He stripped Margaret naked, searched her body, found a mole on her back. He pressed the pin against the mole. It retracted into the handle, the secret spring mechanism doing exactly what it was designed to do. Margaret showed no reaction, because nothing had actually happened. The pin hadn't touched her. Devil's mark confirmed, Kincaid declared. Margaret was hanged 3 weeks later. Kincaid collected his £6. And he realized something. This was the easiest money he'd ever made. Over the next 13 years, John Kincaid examined over 300 accused witches. He found devil's marks on virtually all of them. He became the most respected pricker in Scotland. Magistrates requested him specifically. His reputation spread. He earned over £1,800, equivalent to about $300,000 today. But Kincaid had a secret he shared with every successful pricker in Europe. The pins were rigged. Subscribe to Ash and Crown History if you want to hear the rest of Kincaid's story and how he was finally exposed. Because what happened to him reveals something crucial about how cons work and why they're so hard to stop even when everyone suspects fraud. Hit that subscribe button right now. Let me tell you about the pins. Because understanding how they worked is key to understanding how thousands of innocent people were murdered. Part 3. The trick. There were 2 types of trick pins that prickers used. Let me show you how they worked. The retractable pin. Imagine a pin that looks normal, long, sharp, brass. But inside the wooden handle, there's a spring mechanism. When you press the point against flesh with enough pressure, the pin slides backward into the handle. To someone watching, it looks like the pin is piercing the skin. The pricker makes a show of pushing hard. The accused body moves from the pressure. But the pin never penetrates. It's retracting. No penetration equals no pain equals no bleeding. The accused shows no reaction because nothing is actually happening to them. But to the crowd, to the magistrate, to the court, it looks like they're being stabbed with a pin and feeling nothing. Proof. Scientific. Undeniable. The dual pin. This one's even more insidious. The pricker carries 2 pins that look identical. One is real sharp, normal. One is blunt or retractable. He starts the examination using the real pin. Pricks the accused in various places. They flinch. They bleed. Normal skin, he says. We haven't found it yet. He keeps pricking. The accused is in pain, bleeding from multiple wounds, terrified about what's coming next. Then the pricker switches pins. Subtle. Quick. The accused doesn't see it happen. He presses the fake pin against a mole, a birthmark, anywhere he wants. The accused shows no reaction because nothing is happening. Found it, the pricker announces. The devil's mark. No pain, no blood. The accused is confused. Why didn't that one hurt? But they're too traumatized, too exhausted to question it. And even if they tried, who would believe them over the expert examiner? This was John Kincaid's method, and it worked for 13 years. Until he examined a woman named Janet Cornfoot. Part 4. The woman who questioned Pittenweem, Scotland's 1662 Janet Cornfoot was different from Kincaid's usual targets. She was 45, not elderly. She was articulate. She had family, brothers who worked as merchants who had money and connections. When Janet was accused of witchcraft, her brothers hired a lawyer. A real one. From Edinburgh. The lawyer attended Janet's examination. He watched Kincaid perform his ritual. Strip Janet naked. Search her body. Find marks. Take out his pin. And the lawyer noticed something odd. Kincaid's hand shifted slightly before declaring a devil's mark. Almost like he was switching something, adjusting his grip. After the examination, the lawyer demanded to inspect the pin. Kincaid refused. This is a specialized tool, blessed by the church. It cannot be handled by laypersons. The lawyer persisted. The accused has the right to examine the evidence against her. The magistrate, uncomfortable now, ordered Kincaid to surrender the pin. Kincaid's face went pale. The lawyer examined the pin, pressed it against his own hand. It retracted. This is a fraud, the lawyer declared. This pin is designed to produce false results. Every woman this man has examined should be immediately released and pardoned. The room erupted. But here's what happened next. Kincaid was arrested. His pins were confiscated. He was imprisoned. And Janet Cornfoot? She was released, right? Wrong. The magistrate declared that while Kincaid's methods were questionable, the other evidence against Janet was sufficient. She was found guilty based on witness testimony and executed anyway. Her brothers appealed, spent their fortune on lawyers, wrote letters to the Scottish Parliament. Janet was hanged before the appeal was heard. If you're disturbed by how the system protected itself even after the fraud was exposed, you need to stay subscribed to Ash and Crown History. Because this pattern, where authorities discover their methods are fraudulent but continue using them anyway, repeats throughout history. We show you how to recognize it. Hit subscribe. But Kincaid's arrest did something important. It made other prickers nervous. Suddenly, magistrates were questioning their methods. Lawyers were demanding to see their pins. The con was falling apart. Let me tell you what happened next. Part 5. The doctor who spoke out. London, England 1662, same year as Kincaid's arrest. Dr. John Webster was having doubts. He was a physician, trained in medicine, respected in his community, and he'd been asked to serve as an expert witness in witch trials multiple times. His job was to examine accused witches for devil's marks and testify about his findings. He'd done it multiple times. He'd found marks, testified that they were consistent with demonic compact, helped secure guilty verdicts. But something bothered him. Every elderly woman he examined had marks. Every scar, every mole, every age spot could be called a devil's mark. The test found everyone guilty, and he'd started noticing the prickers' pins, the way they handled them, the way they shifted their grip at crucial moments. One night, a pricker named James Hamilton came to Webster's house, drunk, and confessed everything. "The pins are rigged," Hamilton slurred. "We all know it. Every pricker in England uses trick pins. It's the only way to make money. Can't find witches if the test doesn't work. Right?" Webster was horrified. He'd participated in this. He'd helped execute people based on fraudulent evidence. He was complicit. He could stay quiet, protect his reputation, keep his position as expert witness, or he could speak out, risk everything, tell the truth. Webster spent 6 months writing a book, The Displaying of Supposed Witchcraft. In it, he did something radical for 1662. He called out the fraud. Specifically, explicitly, he wrote, "I have examined these so-called devil's marks with medical knowledge and can state with certainty. They are nothing more than moles, scars, and age spots that all people possess. There is no supernatural property to them. Furthermore, I have observed the pins used by prickers and found them to be trick devices with spring mechanisms designed to retract when pressed against flesh. The pricking test is not medical science. It is fraud intended to produce predetermined results." The book was explosive. Other doctors called Webster a traitor. Prickers threatened him. Witch hunters accused him of protecting witches. But some people listened. Young physicians, especially. They began questioning the devil's mark examination, refusing to participate, speaking out. Slowly, very slowly, the practice began to decline. Subscribe to Ash and Crown History if you want to hear stories of people who risked everything to speak truth to power. Because Webster's story shows that change is possible, but it requires someone brave enough to say, "This is wrong," even when everyone else insists it's right. Hit subscribe. The last recorded devil's mark examination in England was in 1717. In Scotland, 1727. But the damage was done. Thousands had died. And most of them had stories like this. Part 6. The last victim. Dorna, Scotland, 1727. Janet Horne didn't know she was about to become history. She was elderly, nobody knows exactly how old, but probably in her 70s. She lived in a tiny cottage with her daughter, who had been born with one hand smaller and more twisted than the other. It was a birth defect. Common enough. Not dangerous. But in 1727, in a small Scottish village where people still believed in witches, it was suspicious. Janet's neighbors whispered, "Why did the daughter have a deformed hand? Why did Janet live alone? Why did she talk to herself sometimes? Probably dementia, but they didn't have that word yet." Someone finally accused her. Janet had turned her daughter into a pony and ridden her to meet the devil. The daughter's hand was hoofed from the transformation. Janet was arrested. She was examined for devil's marks. They found age spots, moles, the normal marks of an elderly woman. They used the pricking test. Janet, who had reduced sensation in some areas due to age and possible nerve damage, didn't react to some of the pricks. "Devil's marks confirmed," the examiner declared. Janet Horne was found guilty of witchcraft. On the day of her execution, they coated her in tar and paraded her through the village. She smiled and warmed her hands at the fire they were building to burn her alive. She thought it was a bonfire for her benefit. She didn't understand she was about to die. They burned Janet Horne alive on the morning of June 1727. She was the last person legally executed for witchcraft in Scotland. The last victim of a test that had been exposed as fraud 65 years earlier. Let that sink in. 1662. The trick pins were exposed. Kincaid was arrested. Webster published his book proving the test was fraudulent. 1727. They were still using it. Still executing people based on it. 65 years of knowing it was fraud. And they kept doing it anyway. Why? Because the system needed witches to be found. Because careers had been built on finding them. Because too many people had too much invested in the devil's mark examination being real. Better to keep executing people than admit the entire system was a lie. If you're seeing parallels to modern systems that continue long after they're proven to be fraudulent or unjust, you're paying attention. Subscribe to Ash and Crown History. We connect these patterns across centuries so you can recognize them when they appear in your own time. Hit that subscribe button now. Let me show you why this story still matters. Part 7. The pattern that never ends. Let me tell you a modern story. In 2010, a woman named Annie Ducon worked as a chemist at a crime lab in Massachusetts. Her job was to test substances seized in drug arrests and determine if they were illegal drugs. Annie was good at her job. Very good. She processed samples faster than any other chemist. She had a 95+ confirmation rate. Almost everything she tested came back positive for drugs. She was promoted, praised. used as a model employee. Then someone checked her work. Annie had been faking results. For 9 years. She wasn't actually testing the samples. She was just marking them as positive. Because she got praise for high productivity. Because prosecutors wanted high conviction rates. Because the system rewarded finding guilt. When Annie was caught, over 24,000 drug cases had to be reviewed. Thousands of people were in prison based on her false test results. Sound familiar? A test designed to confirm guilt. An examiner rewarded for finding it. Thousands of innocent people punished. The system resistant to questioning because too many careers depend on the results. The tools changed. The pattern didn't. Here's what I want you to watch for. When a scientific test seems designed so that certain people always fail, when examiners are paid or rewarded for finding guilt, when questioning the test makes you seem like you're defending criminals, when authorities continue using the test even after it's proven fraudulent. That's the devil's mark examination. New name. Same con. The retractable pins are in museums now. But the mechanism, manufacture evidence, claim scientific authority, punish the vulnerable, profit from the process that's still running. Subscribe to Ash and Crown History if you want to learn to recognize these patterns before they're used on you or someone you love. We don't just tell history stories, we show you the mechanisms that repeat across centuries. Hit subscribe right now. Let me wrap this story up by taking you back to where we started. Conclusion. What Isobel never knew. Remember Isobel Gowdie, the woman from our opening scene who felt no pain when the pin touched her shoulder? Let me tell you what happened in the 3 weeks between her examination and her execution. Isobel confessed to everything. Flying to witches' sabbaths, meeting the devil, casting curses, all of it. Why would she confess to things that would guarantee her death? Because after the examination, she was kept in a cell. Sleep-deprived, questioned for hours, told that if she confessed, her death would be quick, merciful. If she didn't confess, they'd burn her slowly, keep the flames low, make it last hours. Isobel was 67 years old. Exhausted, terrified. She confessed. Her confession is famous. Historians study it because it's so detailed, so vivid. She described meetings with the devil, transforming into animals, casting elaborate spells. Some historians have wondered, could some of it be true? The details are so specific. No, it's not true. Isobel confessed because she was tortured, sleep-deprived, terrified. She said what they wanted to hear so the torture would stop. And the detail? Torture makes people creative. When you're sleep-deprived for days, your brain generates vivid hallucinations. She probably believed some of what she was saying by the end. But here's what Isobel never knew. The pin that proved her guilt never touched her skin. It was a trick device. The examiner knew. The magistrate probably knew. Maybe even the crowd suspected. She was executed based on fraudulent evidence that everyone involved knew was fraudulent. And she died believing she'd failed a real test. That her body had somehow betrayed her. That the mark on her shoulder truly was evidence of a pact with the devil she'd never made. They let her die believing she was guilty. That's the cruelest part of the devil's mark examination. Not just that it killed thousands of innocent people, but that it made them die believing they deserved it. If this story changed how you see evidence, authority, and the systems we trust to determine guilt and innocence, then you need to be part of the Ash and Crown History community. We tell stories that matter. Stories that connect the past to the present. Stories that show you how the same patterns of deception, oppression, and manufactured evidence repeat across centuries with different names but identical mechanisms. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And drop a comment telling me, what modern tests seem designed so certain people always fail? What evidence do we trust too much? What questions are we afraid to ask? Share this video with someone who needs to hear Isobel's story. Someone who needs to understand that evidence isn't always what it seems. That authority can manufacture proof. that systems protect themselves even after fraud is exposed. Thank you for watching Ash and Crown History. I'll see you in the next story, where we'll explore more dark truths about human nature, systematic deception, and the patterns that never quite go away. The prickers who used trick pins thought they were doing legitimate work. They had training, authority, official positions. They were just con artists who'd found a way to make murder look like medicine. The tricks have changed. The con hasn't. Stay curious. Stay questioning. And never trust a test where everyone fails. Subscribe now. These stories matter.